On November 19th, 1995, Kim Sung-jae, a former member of the popular Korean boy band Deuce, was about to take the stage for a moment that would define his career. After years of hard work, Sung-jae had finally earned his solo debut on SBS Inkigayo, one of Korea's biggest music platforms. The anticipation was electric as the lights dimmed and Sung-jae launched into his performance. A pop-infused rap track filled the venue, a blend of romantic lyrics and catchiness that had the audience hyped. As the final note hit, Sung-jae struck his last pose, sweat dripping down his face before jogging off the stage to a chorus of cheers and high fives from his crew. The celebration that followed was as vibrant as the performance itself. Back at the hotel, the mood was great as they celebrated into the early morning hours. But as everyone went to sleep and dawn broke, something was off. Someone was still stirring in the night. When everyone woke up, they found Sung-jae was still lying face down on the sofa, seemingly fast asleep. His manager, concerned, went to wake him up. But when Sung-jae didn't respond, he flipped him over and his heart sank. Sung-jae's skin was pale, his lips a haunting shade of blue. He wasn't breathing. Up and down his right arm, 28 injection marks were discovered later. Just one day into the start of his solo stardom, Sung-jae's life had been tragically cut short. The question remained, what transpired in those final unseen hours of the night? Welcome to Korean True Crime, with me, your host, Mimi Mizuko. Thank you to my patrons for making this show possible. Korean True Crime has a new sticker tier available now. You get a new sticker every 3 months if you join us on Patreon. Link is in the description. Lastly, join us on Discord for movie nights of films based off of real crimes. Link is also in the description. Warning, today's episode contains some minor descriptions of violence that may be considered disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Over the past 2 decades, South Korea has become synonymous with K-pop. The Hallyu wave has surged across the globe, proving that music transcends both language and culture. But behind the glamour, the vibrant stages, and the meticulously choreographed performances lies a darker reality. For as brightly as these idols are shining, their shadows grow just as long. These shadows linger behind the stage lights, waiting for the moment when the stars falter. K-pop is a fiercely competitive industry. Idols are not born overnight. They are handcrafted through years of rigorous training. Singers and dancers are molded into perfect performers before they are even introduced to the public. They debut in groups that are curated down to the smallest detail to ensure their success. But this life of stardom comes at a cost. For many, their work becomes their life. The fame is intoxicating, and the allure of success makes the sacrifices feel worthwhile. Yet, as we'll talk about in today's case, sometimes stardom can be too much for those around them to handle. In K-pop, it's no secret that idols are often given personas that they are expected to maintain, even when the cameras stop rolling. These personas might be far removed from who these people truly are. Take Jungyoung from the popular group Twice. Fans have long speculated that she is forced to adopt a tomboy image, despite it not being who she naturally is. The members of SHINee have also spoken openly about being crafted into characters for their debut. One of the members was even instructed to speak as little as possible to uphold a mysterious and shy persona, that the company was forcing him to portray. These curated personas are designed to fulfill fan fantasies. They're for you, creating an image of the perfect boyfriend or girlfriend. But these projections are often unattainable ideals that no real person really could ever live up to. Fans often become emotionally invested in these characters, throwing themselves into obsessive admiration for people who will never truly know them. It's important to understand that being an idol involves selling the experience of that character, and this can foster parasocial relationships, a one-sided attachment that leads to you buying more merchandise, tickets, albums, all in an effort to feel closer to them. Parasocial relationships are non-reciprocal, and fans form these with public figures, whether movie star, singer, or YouTuber. The more a fan sees their favorite idol's face, hears their voice, and follows their life, the more that idol begins to feel familiar, like a friend. Sometimes we're allowed intimate glimpses into an idol's life, which can blur the lines between reality and fantasy, leading some fans to feel entitled to know every detail about them. Though parasocial relationships are often linked to loneliness, they aren't inherently harmful. The danger arises when these fantasies turn obsessive. I say this as someone who grew up having a SHINee and Girls' Generation dedicated Tumblr, so I know the struggle of wanting to feel close to these idols, but I don't think I ever rose to the obsessive fan level. Studies have shown that individuals with a predisposition to mental health issues like OCD are much more likely to develop obsessive traits, which can manifest through these intense fixations. The K-pop industry, with its fan meetings, gift-giving opportunities, and even phone calls with the idols, encourages these one-sided relationships. In many cases, they become almost transactional. The more money you spend, the closer you feel to your favorite member. And while sex appeal has always been a powerful marketing tool, K-pop's most lucrative offer is the fantasy of the perfect boyfriend, girlfriend, or best friend. I'm not trying to say that K-pop idols are disingenuous, rather that they are playing a role, one that they must perform to perfection. It's their job. This has always been the case. From the early days of K-pop, when Korean music began to draw its inspiration from Western influences like Nat King Cole or Louis Armstrong, to the later fascination with the Beatles, K-pop has long since been shaped by global sound. Post-World War II, jazz, blues, rock and roll made their mark on Korean music as well, eventually kind of blending in with the Japanese idol group system that had already been established and perfected as a formula for commercial success. As we go back and look at the origins of K-pop, we begin to understand how a genre that blends Western sound and Eastern traditions can give rise to a music industry that, at its core, sells not just songs, but the fantasy of an idolized life. And in the case of Kim Sung-jae, that life, one of fame, success, and adoration, would be tragically cut short before it even truly began. If we go back to the beginning, the first idol group to ever hit the scene was Seo and Boys in 1992. With an American hip-hop style mixed with pop music, they quickly rose to popularity until they disbanded about 4 years later. Groups like Shinhwa, Jetskiss, and HOT formed and started to top the South Korean charts. As Seo and Boys were getting big, a new duo was also being formed, Deuce, comprised of childhood friends Kim Sung-jae and Lee Hyun-do, a group that shot to the top like a shooting star, but ended in the tragic death of Kim Sung-jae. Kim Sung-jae is the topic of discussion today. He was born in 1972 in Seoul, and 2 years later, his baby brother, Kim Sung-uk, was born. The two were inseparable, according to his mother, Yuk Mi-sung. The boys idolized their mother, who on top of being a Japanese teacher, also taught piano, flower arrangement, and gymnastics. They would say that she put all of her effort into all of her hobbies. If she was passionate about something, nothing could stop her from trying to be the best. It's easy to see where both of the brothers got their passion from. Starting at the age of 5, Sung-jae started to show interest in music. He would stay with his mother during her piano lessons and played with a little small guitar toy that he'd gotten for his birthday. So his mother got him a small acoustic guitar and his mother tried to teach him how to play. Sung-jae was particularly obsessed with a Korean folk music song called Letter by a group called Onions. I can't play the song for you, but it's a male duo ballad with a slow tempo and brass solos. While other kids were dancing to much funkier music, Sung-jae was belting love ballads in the living room. His mother would say that it was so surprising the boys loved music so much because she'd never once in her life ever heard their father sing. Their father was a very stoic man who had tapped his foot to music but would never ever sing along. My husband and I are always singing, even making up ridiculous song covers as odes to our dog Winry, so I can't imagine never singing. But that's just how he was. Sung-jae's mother would say that he loved to act cute. He would yell, hug me, tighter, tighter," and always narrated what he'd done every day in the loudest voice possible. He was so proud of everything new he saw, everything he did, even if it meant he'd just seen a ladybug. But when his brother was old enough, he'd make sure that his brother was also there with him, learning everything he could from his older brother. When Sung-jae was 6, his father was working for Korea Heavy Industries, which is Korea's largest power plant. His father worked in the business portion, and the company decided to transfer him to the branch in England. So the entire family packed up their things and moved to London, where he traveled with his family across Paris, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. At such a young age, he had seen so much of what the world could offer, which is an opportunity that very few people get in their lifetimes. Sung-jae was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but his childhood friends would say he didn't act spoiled. The following year, in 1979, at the age of 7, he entered elementary school back in Korea and remained in Korea until he moved to Japan in the 4th grade. Although living in Japan was nice, Sung-jae and his brother were heavily bullied by Japanese kids for being Korean. Their parents had tried to get them into a Korean school, but there were no empty spots for their grades, so they had to register them for a Japanese school. His first day in school, he'd heard other students calling him a 조성징, which is a remnant of Japanese colonization to refer to Korean people. It wasn't inherently racist, but people use it today as a pejorative slur towards Korean people living abroad. After months of being referred to by this slur by every single kid in his class, he called out the leader of the bullying to the playground and beat him silly. His younger brother watched the ordeal from the classroom window, and since then, no one called him or his little brother that word again. Sung-jae was growing a lot faster than the other boys in his grade. He was a lot taller than them, and when they held a school sports event, he won running, high jumping, and long jumping events pretty effortlessly. Sung-jae seemed to really flourish in anything that required physical prowess or creativity. He was practicing music at home, exercising at school, and showing off his artistic talents in art class. His art teacher thought that his drawing skills were so advanced that she framed them and put them in the front of the classroom for the rest of the year. He was just like his mother, someone who put all of their effort into their passions. Despite life in Japan being full of constant bullying, the Kim brothers were able to make some friends. They even met other Korean kids in Japan. Sung-jae was a natural leader and kind of took leadership of this group. He was never accepting of maltreatment from other students and kind of took everyone else under his wing. He had a really strong desire for justice. Rudeness and bullying were just not acceptable to him. A lot of the information we have about both of the boys' childhoods comes from their diary entries or the mother's diary entries that she wrote on a website. Unfortunately, this website is no longer active, but a lot of the posts have been archived. She wrote about everything, the good, the bad, the embarrassing, because she wanted people to remember Sung-jae as who he truly was. He too had his own faults. He used violence as a way to end the harassment of his fellow Korean students, but in the end, she wanted people to know he was good. Sung-jae would stay in Japan until he returned to Korea to attend high school. When he returned to Korea, he entered Korea's incredibly strict and unforgiving education system. This was incredibly difficult for him to adapt to, which meant he was often in trouble and was kind of suffering academically. This led to him being forced to transfer schools twice until he graduated high school. All throughout his schooling, he enjoyed doing two things the most: watching music videos and learning choreographed dances at home. Although he never took formal classes as a kid, he did have a natural talent for dance. He would watch, rewind, and rewatch recorded music videos off of VHS tapes just to get the coolest moves down. In high school, his dancing skills were quite impressive, and he practiced every single day with his best friend, Lee Hyun-do. The two boys were called the Dancing Demons by their classmates. Sung-jae and Hyun-do were growing in such popularity that a dance club in their area reached out to them to hire them as performers. But they were underage, so their parents said no. They needed to finish schooling and get into university before they could even think about dancing. The club tried to offer them really good money, but the parents' decision was final. This was really good motivation for Sung-jae to pursue dance, but he only had 3 more months of high school left, so he hunkered down and tried cramming for the final test. Thankfully, his English and Japanese skills were so strong that he was able to get a good score, despite the rest of his academics being below average. It was just enough for him to enter into a tourism degree at Hanyang University. While he was studying at university, Sung-jae got a call from Hyun-do telling him they had an opportunity for both of them to become singers together. When his father found out he was considering dropping out of college to pursue being a singer and dancer, you can guess his father outright forbid it. His father was very stern about this. He did not think that entertainment was a viable career. And Sung-jae listened and decided to continue practicing dancing just in private. But he did secretly accept the offer. The lessons were not free, so he had to hide his spending from his parents. He was living on such a tight budget, he couldn't even take the bus or the subway, which would cost like 10 cents. Even at his lowest point, Sung-jae was still a loving big brother. He would return home just to congratulate his brother on his grades and then sneak some pocket money into his brother's wallet. Hyun-do and Sung-jae were spending their nights at a dance club named Moon Night in Itaewon. It was at this club that they met Hyun Jin-young, a man who worked in the entertainment industry with various talents like dancers and singers. So every day after school, Hyun-do and Sung-jae would meet at the club and practice the latest dance moves. That was when Hyun Jin-young approached them and said that there was openings for backup dancers for the popular group Wawa after 2 of the dancers had to enlist in the military for their mandatory military service. The boys sprung on this opportunity. This was their chance to make it big, so they became the new Wawa dancers. In reality, Hyun Jin-young had actually told Sung-jae that he was only interested in him, not Hyun-do, but Sung-jae wasn't going to join unless he was with his best friend. If he was going to make his dreams work, he was going to take his best friend with him. Despite Sung-jae being the better dancer, his singing skills were nothing to write home about. Hyun-do made up for these gaps with singing, lyric writing, and producing skills. After a short while in Wawa, the two boys decided they had what it takes to make their own group. They'd seen the rise of Sotaejian boys, who had become one of the first rap groups in Korean history. Korea was becoming enamored by the music style and inspirations of like Run DMC and Michael Jackson. So in 1993, the two boys seized the chance to form their own dance and singing duo called Deuce with Jigu Records. Sung-jae was in charge of video production while Hyun-do focused on the audio. Their 8-track album was heavily inspired by African American music like rock and roll, hip-hop, and swing beat. They would be considered leaders in the rap dance trend of the early 1990s that took Korea by chokehold. With their song Untitled, this would be the first song consisting of only rapping to ever be released in South Korea. Kim Sung-jae was known for being incredibly serious about what he did. He was also incredibly passionate. He was a gem in the rough because of his honesty and belief in hard work. He worked hard when he worked, but he was extremely easygoing and kind to those around him. Because of his kindness and confident demeanor, Sung-jae became a role model for many Korean rappers to come, like Zico and Rain. At the height of their popularity, on June 7th, 1995, the duo held a press conference and announced the news of their disbandment. It came as a great shock to their fans, who watched their climb to fame. But the men said that their life of fame had taken a toll on their health, leading to them making the difficult decision to discontinue their group. Following a goodbye concert, they split up the following month. There may have been plans to join together in the future, but in the meantime, they just wanted to take a long vacation. So they traveled to LA in July 1995. While in America, Sung-jae received a call from his former manager offering him a position to make a solo debut album that would come out in November. This was an incredibly difficult decision to make. They wanted Sung-jae back because he was a very strong rapper and dancer, but not Hyun-do, who the company thought wasn't as great of a performer. While Hyun-do's feelings were hurt, he still encouraged Sung-jae to return to Korea and pursue his dreams. They had one last dinner before Sung-jae's flight back. Hyun-do recalls he told Sung-jae, "I told you that you can go to Korea. You don't have to worry. Your deuce is Kim Sung-jae, so what are you worried about?" This would be the last meal Hyun-do and Sung-jae would have together. As soon as Sung-jae landed in Seoul, he was put to work. In just 2 months' time, he finished a full album, choreographed the dances, shot the music videos, and did photo shoots for the album and brand deals. When the album released, he would perform on SBS's music program Inkigayo to promote the album. Sung-jae, along with the backup dancer group West, were put in the luxury hotel Swiss Grand Hotel in Seoul. They had been living in this hotel during the entire production of the album for about the last 2 months at this point. Just the rent alone for this suite annex was 6.5 million won a month. Sung-jae's production company knew that he was going to be a big hit though, and they were right, so they were investing in him. But it was all riding on the debut stage where he would perform his song As I Told You. He was appearing on SBS's Inkigayo. Inkigayo means popular song. This is a performance stage where musicians of all different kinds can perform their new songs and be ranked or receive awards that can really make or break their career. He was set to perform on November 19th, 1995. And just prior to his performance, everyone gathered in his dressing room with the backup dancers, and they watched the performance of the rapper going on before them, which happened to be Sotaeji and Boys. His dancers began mocking the song, alluding to it sounding like it was copywritten from another song they'd heard before. Sung-jae was someone who really stood up for what was right, and he told them, "No, we don't do that here. Don't do that." He didn't stand for any kind of mocking or bullying, even towards other artists he was competing against. He also had a lot of respect for fellow Korean rappers. Finally, it was time for the performance, so Sung-jae and his dancers got into position. The time came and the lights turned on. The announcer said, "Here to perform the solo debut song is Kim Sung-jae of the former group Deuce." The red, yellow, blue, and purple lights illuminated the dimly lit stage on Kim Sung-jae, who was wearing an ice hockey uniform and gloves that were all styled by himself. Fog machines turned on and made the stage smoky with backup dancers wearing similar clothes behind him. There were also women off to the side with feather boas and champagne glasses standing and swaying to the music. It's a very fun song, and the crowd went absolutely wild for its fun beat, bad boy dance moves, and catchy lyrics about love. I recommend going and listening to this song. It's on YouTube, and it's a spectacular performance. You'll find yourself moving to the music as you listen. As he walks off the stage, he grabbed a cloth and wiped sweat off his forehead that was dripping off his face. His friends from his days at the Itaewon Club Moon Night were also there to congratulate him, as well as Sotaeji, who was performing before him. It was the start of a successful solo career. It would have been if he survived the night. He agreed with his dancers that that was their best performance yet. They'd been practicing for weeks to nail the energetic dance. He celebrated his successful performance with the team and he planned to just go home and get some rest. But his manager told him instead they were going to have a party back at the hotel. He had planned an entire celebration and that they could get rest afterwards. Sung-jae came from a well-off family, but this hotel was a new kind of wealth he hadn't seen before. On his way to the hotel, he called a reporter, Hong Sung-gyu, who he was friends with, and asked if he saw the performance. Hong recalls that Sung-jae sounded so excited and that when they hung up, Sung-jae promised to call him again tomorrow. But that phone call never came. His last call was made to his mother. He asked if she also saw the performance, which of course she had. She'd recorded it and everything. She remembers saying, "Of course, that was so cool. Not because you're my son, but because it was so good. You worked so hard." Sung-jae was giddy when he told his mother that So Tae-ji had also congratulated him and told him that his performance was good. This was kind of like an idol to him. He said he felt touched by the kindness. Sung-jae asked if his mother was going to come to the hotel, but she said, no, just enjoy your night. I'll see you tomorrow. And he promised, even if the sky splits in two, I will come to see you tomorrow. Before they arrived to the hotel, the entire team went to get dinner at KFC, which was a favorite of theirs. Then they got to the hotel. This hotel is like a suite annex, which I hadn't known what that was prior to this, but it's essentially a very, very large apartment that you can rent for a long period of time. They had been renting it for a few months. It was 3 bedrooms, a living room, 2 bathrooms, and had 2 separate private entrances. They even had their own elevator. While they were still at KFC, Sung-jae's girlfriend, Kim Yoo-sun, arrived at the restaurant. It's unclear whether he called to ask her to come or if she called asking if she could come, but everyone seemed a little on edge around her. Sung-jae and Yoo-sun had met 2 years prior in 1983 when he was dancing at a nightclub in Gangnam. The two found that they had a lot in common and started spending a lot of time together, and then they started dating. Once they started dating, though, they were seldom apart. Wherever Sung-jae went, Yoo-sun was close behind, whether he knew it or not. But Yoo-sun was a full-time student, so she didn't have a ton of time to spend with him, so she asked him to call her and text her often. Yoo-sun was attending a dental school to become a dentist until she graduated in early 1985. However, when it came time for her to take the national dentistry exam, she failed. She'd have to take it again at a later date, but in the meantime, her entire world was crushed. She became a recluse and only spoke to Sung-jae. Earlier that night, Yoo-sun talked to Sung-jae, who asked her to record his debut stage so that they could watch it at the party. She got a blank videotape ready and recorded the performance, and as soon as it was done, she met them at KFC. She made sure she was looking her best, packed the videotape in her black fur purse, and left her grandmother's apartment. Yoo-sun was the daughter of 2 very successful pharmacists who owned more than 10 pharmacies. Her mother was also preparing to run for the National Assembly for the New Korea Party, but she wanted to live in Seoul, so she lived with her grandmother and her younger sibling. Yoo-sun drove her luxury Hyundai Grandeur to the KFC just after 7 p.m. to meet up with Sung-jae and the others. When she got there were about 8 other people there, including the backup dancers, makeup artist, and manager E. There was also another woman, the female lead actor from his recent music video, Jin Se-ra. Yoo-sun did not like Jin Se-ra. She had been cast as the love interest in the music video and had returned to Korea with Sung-jae to pursue a career in music. Sung-jae had actually encouraged her to make her debut in Korea. He was really influential in the music industry now and really wanted his friends to be there alongside with him. They ate their meals and drove by van back to the Swiss Grand Hotel a little bit after 9 p.m. They got to the hotel and settled in at around 10 p.m. and they gathered in the living room to watch that recorded debut stage. Everyone said the atmosphere was so jovial. They cracked open a few beers and celebrated a great performance as the night got darker. It was near 11:30 when dancers Jin, Joan, Nicole, Se-ra, and Tricky went to their rooms. The hotel annex had plenty of rooms where they all lived the last 2 months, but most of them shared rooms. Jin, Joan, and Se-ra slept in the largest room. Nicole slept in a small room next to it. And Tricky had made a large closet into another private room next to the living room. Sung-jae, Yusun, Noah, and manager Lee stayed in the living room having drinks and rewatching the debut stage on repeat. When 1 a.m. came around, Noah decided to go to his room, but he saw that manager Lee was going to sleep in the living room, which he had been doing the last 2 months. But seeing that Yusun and Sung-jae were together, he thought that it was probably best to give the couple a little bit of privacy. So manager Lee brought his sleeping mat into Noah's room. Yusun and Sung-jae spent the rest of the evening in the living room cuddling and watching the performance. They would probably be dealing with hangovers the next morning, but for that night, they celebrated as they should for such a great success in his career. It was clear he was destined to be a star. Yusun recalls bringing out her cosmetics bag and starting to help clean the makeup off of Sung-jae's face from his performance. He didn't like to go to sleep with makeup on his face. After 1 a.m., Sung-jae's mother received a phone call from one of his managers who was away for his military service. He asked about how the performance went since he couldn't get a hold of Sung-jae. He asked if he should go visit Sung-jae, but his mother said no. He needs to sleep after such a performance. His mother made a remark that she felt like she should go visit him, but decided to let him party with his friends. There was just something in her telling her to go see him. They talked about how great the performance was and hung up. Little did they know that if they had visited Sung-jae, they might have saved his life. In the early hours of the morning, everyone was asleep except Yusun and Sung-jae, who spent the night cuddling. One of the dancers heard the washing machine turn on in the middle of the night, which woke them up, but they quickly fell back asleep. Yusun says as they talked, she gave him a massage on his arms to help him relax. At 3:40 a.m., according to her, Yusun grabbed her purse and coat and left to go home. Remember that time, because it was highly debated in understanding the whodunit situation that will unfold. You're probably wondering, well, can't they confirm what time people left the hotel since there's CCTV? But it's unfortunate to say that the police never checked CCTV in this case. When manager E woke up and came out of the bedroom at 6 a.m., November 20th, 1985, he found Sung-jae laying face down on the sofa. His face was tilted right, his nose buried in the couch pillows. Manager E tapped him on the back to wake him up, but when Sung-jae didn't respond, he figured he must have been up really late and decided to let him get some more beauty rest. But 30 minutes later, as manager E was packing up all of their costumes, he returned to wake up the rest of the dancers. They needed to check out of the hotel this morning. When the other dancers started coming out, he returned to Sung-jae and again tapped him on the shoulder. He didn't respond. So he grabbed him by the shoulders and kind of shook him gently. Tricky had come out of his room and lifted his shoulders to wake him up, thinking Sung-jae is being lazy and trying to be funny. But when his body sagged unnaturally back into the sofa, he kind of jumped back. Sung-jae's lips were blue. His skin was devoid of color and he was cold to the touch. Noah rushed closer to him and mentioned to everyone that he had seen blood in his mouth. Tricky and manager E pulled him off the couch at 6:40 a.m. to lay him on his back. They tried to wake him up again to no success. Noah called the front desk and asked them to call an ambulance. It's unclear why none of them decided to call an ambulance on their own phones or from the room phone, but they were all panicking. If you're a part of my audience that's under the age of 25, yes, they did have cell phones at this time, although many people also had pagers. I was only a year old when this happened, so I also had to look up what kind of communication devices they had at this time. The ambulance was called by the front desk at 6:50 a.m. The dispatch order was received at the Western Fire Station at 7:07 a.m., and the paramedics arrived at 7:11 a.m. The emergency workers were taken to the hotel room, carrying a stretcher with them. This hotel room is only on the second floor, so they were able to get there quickly, where they found Sung-jae lying on the sofa. The group had put him on his back. To paint a picture of the scene, Sung-jae was lying on the sofa wearing a green long-sleeved t-shirt, blue shorts, and had his earrings still in. Noah and manager E said that they saw blood stains on the pillow where his mouth had been, but the paramedics didn't notice any blood in his mouth. The paramedic quickly felt for a pulse on his neck, and when no pulse was detected, they checked for other signs of life. There were no external injuries on his body. but his skin was turning blue and was bloodless. They secured him to the stretcher and transported Sung-jae to the nearest emergency department. The ambulance left the hotel parking lot at 7:21 a.m., just 10 minutes later. It was just after 8 a.m. when Yoo-sun arrived to the hospital after Noah had called her. More people from Sung-jae's company had arrived, including senior manager Jung Jae-moon, agency CEO Kim Dong-gu, and Kim Jin-woo. When Yoo-sun arrived, Sung-jae's body had already been moved to the morgue for examination. The morgue staff couldn't immediately find an obvious cause of death and needed more time to perform an examination or possibly an autopsy. This infuriated Yoo-sun. She started pleading with the hospital staff to not perform an autopsy because she believed it would be like him dying twice. A phrase that we also heard in the last episode from Amun-suk. When the hospital dismissed her because she's not a part of his family and couldn't make medical decisions for him, she turned to the others and said, "We need to give money to stop the autopsy. We need to give money to the coroner to rule out a heart attack. Is there anything that money can't do?" She was panicking. But when an autopsy was agreed on by his mother, she said, "You will regret this." While the autopsy was being started, agency CEO Kim Dong-gu decided that they would hold a funeral at St. Mary's Hospital's funeral hall, which was not the hospital they were at the time. They needed more space to accommodate fans who were probably going to gather outside. So everyone got into vans and started to travel to St. Mary's to prepare for the funeral and press conference. Noah and a few of the other dancers were in the same car as Yoo-sun, and she suddenly broke the silence by blurting out, "I got home at 3:40 a.m. No one had spoken about what had happened or even asked her about what time she had left. It was completely unprompted. In reality, there was no cause of death yet, so most of them believed that Sung-jae died of natural causes. The immediate belief was that Sung-jae had died from gwarosa, or death from overwork. There is no legal term for death from overwork, but it's possible to die from the stress of working so hard. In Korea, the maximum working hours each week have fluctuated from 52 to 60, with proposals happening to increase it to 80 hours. Korea is a nation that never sleeps because they're still at work. In reality, the most common people who have died from overwork are delivery drivers, truck drivers, medical professionals, and firefighters. Working in sweltering summers and freezing winters with little to no breaks for upwards of 50 hours a week can leave a person on the verge of sleep deprivation and malnutrition. This can lead to a multitude of life-threatening conditions. But Sung-jae's family and friends couldn't believe that that was how he truly died, because he seemed to be having the time of his life. But perhaps there was a darkness that nobody had seen. The CEO of Sung-jae's agency called Hong Sung-gyu, the reporter friend who Sung-jae had called the night before. The CEO informed him, "Sung-jae has gone to heaven." Hong thought that this was a joke and replied, Yeah, he's feeling so good, he must feel like he's flying to heaven. The CEO had to clarify, no, he died last night of natural causes. The hospital had told the agency that Sung-jae had died of natural causes in his sleep. The CEO decided to call Hong so quickly because he was in charge of publishing an article titled Kim Sung-jae Exclusive Comeback Interview. These papers were not digital back then, so the articles had already been printed. Now they had an entirely different story to publish, and they had to act fast because those stories were supposed to be sent out that day. Word had already gotten out that Sung-jae had died, and fans were starting to gather at the funeral hall. At this time, Hyun-do was still in America, but as soon as he heard, he got on a plane to Korea. Sung-uk, his little brother, was in the military and received a call later that day. What broke my heart the most was that just days prior, Sung-uk had mailed his brother a handwritten apology because they had recently fought. He also congratulated his brother on being able to perform on TV. But the letter wouldn't arrive until days after Sung-jae passed away. Sung-uk would say his biggest regret is not telling his brother he loved him more. At this time, Mrs. Yuk, Sung-jae's mother, arrived to the first hospital, but was told her son's body had already been moved to St. Mary's and she had to get back in her car and drive to the next hospital. She found the dancers, company workers, and Yusun gathered inside the funeral hall. Yusun was sobbing louder than anyone else in the room. When Mrs. Yuk approached Yusun, she said to her, "Mother, I heard that Sung-jae died. I'll take care of you until the end." His mother was appalled by this and replied, "Why should I live with you?" She started questioning Yusun immediately. "When did you leave the hotel?" Yusun wiped her tears and said, "Well, I left the hotel at about 5 a.m. If I stayed longer, maybe this wouldn't have happened." This is what Mrs. Yuk recalls, although no one else heard Yusun say this besides her. Noah and the rest of the people in the car clearly heard her say that she left at 3:40 a.m. Later that day, as everyone was still gathered at the funeral hall, lead detective Lee Seok-jae of the Sobu police station received the death report, which stated that there were suspicious markings on the body that led them to believe that there was foul play. The immediate need for evidence was to discover if someone had broken into the hotel room in the middle of the night to rule out whether or not the crime was committed by someone who was inside the suite or if someone had broken in. There were no signs of forced entry at any of the entrances or windows in the suite. Detective E searched the trash cans for something discarded that could lead to any clues about what happened that night. Meanwhile, the police put in a request for an autopsy to be done. No signs of trauma were immediately apparent. Typically, after a person dies, any areas where bruising happened or injuries occurred will begin to turn dark purple or black. The blood begins to settle in the part of the body closest to the ground as well, causing discoloration in the skin. This is called lividity. Besides the natural lividity, there were no signs of bruising. He hadn't been struck or injured prior to his death. The signs of foul play that they had noted actually happened as the medical examiner continued their external inspection and found multiple injection marks on his right arm. There was small amounts of bleeding around the injection marks, meaning that this was done while his heart was still pumping blood. The examiner counted 15 injection marks on the arm, which later, when re-examined with magnifying tools, revealed 28 total injection marks that followed the veins on his arms. The inflammation around these marks and the blood present was used to determine that these were all made within a short period of one another. None of them were done post-mortem. The medical examiner determined that it was most likely that these all happened within a 30-minute window. The marks were made with the same size of syringe, but they couldn't know if the same exact syringe was used for all of them. The medical examiner put in the notes that the injections were not done well, likely due to poor skill of the attacker or because Sung-jae had injected himself, which would mean he used his non-dominant hand. The time of death was determined to be at 7:05 a.m. This was determined by many factors, including the rigidity of the body, the lividity, and the condition of the pupils. Lividity typically occurs between 4 to 12 hours after death. If you're wondering, how could he have died at 7:05 a.m. when they found him dead at 6 a.m.? We will get into it, don't worry. The question on their minds was this a suicide, drug use gone wrong, or a murder? The police came to take pictures of the syringe marks the next day, and they took close-up photos using a printing Polaroid camera, an error that would potentially prevent the truth of Sung-jae's death from ever being known in trial. The issue is that printing Polaroid cameras, unlike digital or analog photography, whitens the bright areas and darkens the shadows on the quick-developing film. This meant that when the medical examiners later looked at these photos, they couldn't determine much of anything from them. The time of death will be in constant debate throughout this trial, because if you recall, Yusun states that she left at 3:40 or 5 a.m., and his body was found at 6 a.m. The ambulance arrived shortly after 7 a.m. Does this mean that he was still able to be resuscitated up until minutes of the ambulance arriving? Other medical examiners criticized the original doctor for not using a rectal temperature during the autopsy, but the coroner said they didn't think it would be helpful because too much time had passed. However, other examiners say that even 12 hours after a person dies, the rectal temperature can determine the time of death up to an error of 1 hour with almost no influence of external factors. While they're figuring out the time of death, it came time to break the news to the public. Sung-jae's company cautiously announced that the cause of death was undetermined, but they hinted that a heart attack due to a weak heart was a possible explanation. In the meantime, everyone who was present or was close to Sung-jae was intensely questioned by the police. Sung-jae's mother, Mrs. Yuk, unfortunately had only arrived to St. Mary's after the autopsy had already begun. It wouldn't be until later that night when she would be allowed to see her son's body. As she walked into the room and saw him laying on the table, she screamed at him, "Open your eyes! Are you lying to me?" Sung-uk, Sung-jae's little brother, was able to arrive that night to attend more of the funeral rites. Everyone there says it was heartbreaking to see Sung-uk cry at his brother's portrait. Hyun-do arrived later that evening as well, just in time for the funeral, and his eyes were already swollen from crying. Everyone who knew Sung-jae loved him dearly. No one believed someone could have done this to him. Even the police. The official autopsy report detailed that the cause of death was suspicious because they didn't believe it to be natural causes because of the injections. They detailed 6 reasons why. First, the needle marks were in an irregular pattern. Second, there was, in the patterns of the marks, signs that the injector was attempting to follow the veins. Third, the victim was right-handed, making it difficult for him to inject himself using his left hand. It would be a very unnatural angle, and there would really be no advantage to injecting yourself with your non-dominant hand. Fourth, no syringes were found at the crime scene or in his belongings. Fifth, there were 28 total injection sites that were new, with no injection scars, meaning that he was not an intravenous drug user. And sixth, the administered drug is not typically used for recreational use or outside of medical settings, which we will go into great detail about, and they talked about heavily in the trial. This report ended by stating that the doctor would be calculating the lethal dosage of the drug found in the victim's system, and they would mail results when they were done. These results wouldn't be finalized until December 1st, 1995. Sung-jae had died on November 20th in the early morning. Going back 2 days after his death, when the police were questioning everyone, they took a statement from Yusun as well. She told the officer that they had previously broken up because she had heard that Sung-jae was doing drugs behind her back, and when she confronted him, he acted super crazy and erratic, so she left him. No one else that knew Sung-jae would say that he had ever done drugs. Any kind of drugs. In fact, he wasn't even known for heavily drinking. In reality, the couple had broken up right before he flew to LA in early November 1995. The next day, the 23rd, 3 days after he passed, the police contacted manager E again after searching his house for evidence and finding nothing. They wanted to get his statement just one more time because there was some piece of information that just didn't sit right with their story. Previously, manager E had stated that when he woke up, Sung-jae was laying face down in the living room at 6 a.m. However, Hyun-do, Sung-jae's best friend, had called at 5 a.m. to the hotel room, and manager E answered. He said that he was already awake and cleaning up, but Sung-jae was sleeping. Manager E told Hyun-do that he had tried to wake up Sung-jae, but he was fast asleep. This detail is incredibly important to the police now because multiple people's testimonies are overlapping incorrectly. Manager E had not seen Yusun leave, which if her sudden confession to Mrs. Yuk was true, then either Yusun did not leave before 5 a.m. at 3:40 like she previously stated, or manager E had indeed seen her leave. This also means that manager E tried to wake Sung-jae up at 5 a.m. and then at 6 a.m., but they didn't call emergency services until 6:40 a.m., meaning manager E was trying to wake Sung-jae while he was still alive and could have been saved by receiving medical care. Was this intentional or not? Of course, the media found out about the injection marks and immediately went feral, calling this a drug-related case and insinuating that Sung-jae was a heavy drug user because sensationalism sells. The company's CEO, Kim Dong-soo, shaved his head to prove his seriousness to protest these drug accusations and actually held a press conference with Sung-jae's mother, to dissuade reporters from making harmful accusations. The press conference was flooded with fans and other celebrities who wanted to attend the ongoing funeral rites. Mrs. Yuk decided to cremate Sung-jae and bury him in Gyeongbuk. Sung-jae had always said that he wanted to live there someday. It's just unfortunate that he was only able to remain there after death. He deserved better than this. As they drove to the burial site, Yusun cried loudly and started talking to the others about her memories of him. She started slipping weird, out-of-pocket things into the conversation, like how close they were and how she thought he was going to propose to her. And then she said suddenly, the police got something wrong. He was actually left-handed. She moved the conversation to suggest that Sung-jae had indeed hidden a drug habit from everyone and no one knew about it, which no one said anything to her about because the atmosphere was so tense, but it raised pretty much everyone's suspicions of her. If she was trying to not act suspicious, she was doing a very poor job of it. The van pulled up to Gyeongbuk Mountain, and Sung-uk held his brother's urn while his mother took out a handful of ashes and scattered them into the air. Then everyone lined up and took turns scattering a piece of Sung-uk into the wind. A light snow started to come down. Sung-jae was buried, but his investigation was still ongoing. His family just wanted his soul to rest in the meantime. The police's top clue was that, by multiple people, they had received reports that Yusung's actions and what she was telling people were highly suspicious, but the police didn't really have any clear evidence to point to her. They put her on their radar, but there was nothing more they could do at the moment. Their real top priority was trying to prove that Sung-jae had injected himself with drugs and that there was no possibility of murder. While the police were investigating an accidental death from drug overdose, this is when, on December 1st, the National Forensic Service determined that the injected drug was not a commonly used one. They did the normal drug tests on his urine, blood, and hair for common drugs like marijuana, cocaine, ketamine, methamphetamines, just to name a few. None of them came back positive, but they needed to determine what was injected. Dr. Kim Sung-jae of the toxicology department was able to determine what the injected drug was. The first substance they identified was tyletamine. If you're a vet or a vet student, you might know this drug. It's an animal anesthetic. The second substance was zolazepam, a tranquilizer. These two are often compounded into a medication called Telazol. It should be noted that Telazol has been documented to be used recreationally and is a controlled substance, but it's incredibly rare for recreational use. It's in the same family as ketamine, which is much more commonly used. Ketamine, I should mention, is commonly used in conscious sedation dentistry, administered intravenously. The specific compound that was discovered in Sung-jae's blood was actually a diluted compound under the name of Zolatil 50. This compound is mostly unheard of for abuse in recreational use. Despite the police wanting to pursue this case as a drug overdose, the forensic doctors disagreed with this pursuit. The case starts to get even more suspicious. At the same time that the forensic doctors are writing the autopsy results, Yusun leaves her apartment building to go to a payphone outside. Yusun dials a number and says, "Sir, I need to see you briefly and tell you something." The man on the phone asks, "Who is this?" Yusun replied, "You'll know who I am when you meet me." Her whereabouts would be unknown following this call. 2 days later, on December 3rd, 1995, Mrs. Yuk saw that 60 Minutes Korea was doing a report on Sung-jae's death. In this reporting, the journalist stated that the death was related to a drug overdose with drugs he obtained while overseas. I wasn't too surprised to hear this because often when drugs are involved in a Korean case, the media will try to find a way to make sure that those drugs are not a problem in Korea, but a problem with a foreign country. There is a lot of nationalism and xenophobia in crime reporting in Korea. Mrs. Yuk was a proud woman and couldn't stand for such slander against her son, so she filed a request for KBS to correct their statements and apologize. She also called to make a meeting with her lawyer. She told her lawyers that she had a feeling that they were going to try to close this case as a drug overdose, which she knew couldn't be true. She couldn't believe that her son could have been doing drugs. But not just that, she had seen the medical examiner's report who suggested that there was foul play. Mrs. Yuk told her lawyer everything she had seen and heard about what had happened prior to her son's death. She also mentioned how suspicious Yusun was acting. She recalled that Yusun stated she left at 5 a.m., and that she was stating that Sung-jae was left-handed, then told others he was ambidextrous. Her story was constantly changing. Her lawyers suggested that she submit a petition to ban Yusun from leaving the country because she had talked about having a trip to Japan. She wanted Yusun investigated for the murder of Sung-jae. Mrs. Yuk wasn't only targeting Yusun though, she was also targeting the police. She believed that they were not doing all that they could and that they were choosing to investigate this as a suicide rather than a murder. She cited that the crime scene wasn't even preserved and adequate evidence testing wasn't done at the crime scene. For instance, they would have been able to prove if Sung-jae was left or right-handed by collecting one of the beers he had been drinking just that night. It took 4 days for the police after receiving the autopsy report to approve it and announce the results. The police also declared that they were pursuing the case as an accidental death rather than a homicide. There were detectives in this case that went against this and said that there was a high possibility that this was murder, which only led to Yusun receiving the travel ban. Oh, and Manager E also received a travel ban as well. Mrs. Yuk was doing everything she could to ensure that this saw justice and that her son was able to rest. She decided to go visit a traditional Korean shaman, which was at the suggestion of one of her friends, because they thought she should try to appease Sung-jae's spirit. The shaman, Park Soo-moo, channeled Sung-jae's spirit and told Mrs. Yuk that Sung-jae did die from an injection. Specifically, they said it was an injection of anesthetics used on animals, which was a detail that was not told to the public. This was enough to convince Mrs. Yuk that her son was indeed murdered. The shaman came with her to the memorial service for Sung-jae and approached a close friend of his who was battling a chronic illness. The shaman asked the friend how they were feeling and said not to worry because they will get better. Then, to a senior executive of Sung-jae's entertainment company, she said, "Your brother is too successful, but if you just wait a little bit longer, you'll also be fine." The two thought that these statements were so spot on. They felt like the shaman truly had channeled Sung-jae's spirit. These were things that Sung-jae would have said to them. Yet, the shaman wasn't going to make a large difference to the police. It wasn't until 2 days later, on December 7th, that the case would be changed entirely. A man called the Banpo police station and said, "I have something to report in relation to the Kim Sung-jae case." This informant, we can call Dr. Bae, was the director of the Banpo Animal Hospital in Seoul. Dr. Bae had heard the news of Kim Sung-jae's tragic death. After hearing about this, it wasn't long before something clicked in Dr. Bae's memory. Something that seemed far too suspicious to be a mere coincidence. Earlier that November, Dr. Bae was working in the Banpo Animal Hospital when a woman named Yusun came in. We know her. She told Dr. Bae that her dog was suffering from dementia, a condition that made it hard for the dog to control its bowel movements. The story that she spun was heart-wrenching, and Yusun explained that her dog was in so much pain she needed to have it euthanized. There was just one problem. Yusun's dog was not sick. This entire story was fake. She did have a dog, an adult Maltese, at home, but others would say that this dog was perfectly healthy. However, in the weeks after this, just prior to Sung-jae's death, her dog did pass away and she bought a new puppy. So maybe she was telling the truth and no one knew about it, or she did something to the dog. Believing her story, Dr. Bae had prescribed Yusun Zolotil 50, a diluted solution typically used as an anesthetic, along with 7 grams of magnesium sulfate and 2 syringes. The total cost for these supplies was 30,000 won, just under $27 US. As someone who was a pet owner who lived in Korea, veterinarians will not prescribe medication unless your pet is there and present. That is, unless the medication is like over the counter, like tick or heartworm medications. I am guessing that policy exists precisely to prevent situations like this. It was during this vet visit that Yoo-sung had acquired the drugs. That took place in early November, just weeks before Sung-jae's death. What makes it even more chilling is that the mysterious man Yoo-sung had called was none other than Dr. Pae himself. Yoo-sung contacted Dr. Pae asking to meet in person. When they did, she begged him not to inform the police about the medication. She claimed that she feared getting in trouble because Sung-jae had used the drugs to kill himself. There was a nervousness in her voice as she inquired if Solitil could be detected in an autopsy. To Dr. Pae, the conversation felt less like her being afraid of a misunderstanding and more like an attempt at damage control. Feeling unsettled and uncomfortable with being told not to go to the police, Dr. Pae made the decision to report the incident. It was the right decision. At this point, Yoo-sun hadn't been the primary suspect in the investigation, but this new information forced the police to reconsider that this was a murder. Now, they could no longer deny the possibility that Yoo-sun had played a significant role in Sung-jae's death, whether it be accidental or on purpose. On December 7th, detectives from Sobu Police Station were dispatched to Yoo-sun's home. They searched the premises for any evidence that might link her to the crime. Later that day, at 6:25 p.m., Yoo-sun was arrested. Offended by the accusations, she denied ever purchasing the drugs or syringes. For 4 hours, she maintained her denial. It wasn't until the detectives presented the testimony that Dr. Bae had given them that she admitted that she indeed had bought the medication. That night, Yoo-sun was placed in a detention center. The following morning, the police publicly announced that they had arrested a suspect on emergency charges of murder, although they withheld her name. Based on her testimony and their own inferences, the police tried to piece together what might have happened. They believed that Yoo-sun had lied to Sung-jae, who was exhausted from his performance, and told him that she had some anti-fatigue medication that could help him, some muscle relaxers or the like. Sung-jae, trusting her, agreed to take it. But instead of a painkiller, Yoo-sung injected him with Zolotil. In total, she administered 28 injections of it, which ultimately led to his fatal overdose. Yoo-sun was a dentistry student and had likely received training in administering injections as part of her schooling. But keep in mind, she did fail her dentistry exam. The fact that she gave Sung-jae 28 injections seemed incredibly odd. They speculated that the syringes may have been incredibly small and she had to inject him that many times to reach a lethal dose. The vet had said that the syringes were 3 millimeters each, which is small, and to give the full dose of Zolotil, she would have had to inject multiple times. The police asked her why she had not used the drugs to euthanize her dog. Yoo-sun claimed that she had initially intended to use the drugs to take her own life after failing the national dental exam, but she said that after regaining her composure, she had thrown the drugs away. This was more common in the 1990s, but Yoo-sun was brought in for a Q&A with reporters. Standing in front of the press, she insisted on her innocence. She told them that she and Sung-jae had been planning to get married ever since they first met. She said they'd had no breakups, no fights, and she had no reason to want him dead. He'd even given her a nice pair of boots recently. She claimed the police were unfairly targeting her, and she said that on the night of Sung-jae's death, he had fallen asleep and she left the hotel to return home. She was already changing her story again. She had already admitted that they had broken up because she thought he was a drug user, and now she's saying that they had never fought or broken up. On December 9th, before they had to release Yoo-sun because they didn't have enough evidence to keep her, the Western District Prosecutor's Office requested a new arrest warrant for Yoo-sun. The judge, An Won-sik, judged that they believed the police were correct to arrest her because she had a violent history. In July 1995, 4 months prior to Sung-jae's death, Yoo-sun tied Sung-jae up using tape, which she did while he was asleep, to avoid him from leaving the apartment to sign a contract. If he signed this contract, he would be leaving the country for America to go shoot his music videos. Sung-jae woke up taped to the bed. He pled with her to let him go, but she kept him tied up long enough so he couldn't go to that meeting. He was able to convince her and promise her that he would come back and she agreed to let him go. That was when he left the country and broke up with her. The police were pretty sure that Yusun was the murderer at this point, whether the death was accidental or not. However, the police received a lot of criticism from the public because this entire case was built off of a tip from the veterinarian rather than a single piece of physical evidence. And Yusun never confessed to hurting him. The public lacks a lot of confidence in the Korean police, so it didn't really matter what the Korean police did, they were not really going to support them. The newspapers even predicted that Yusun wouldn't be found guilty because all of the evidence was circumstantial. Keep in mind, Yusun had great lawyers. She was the daughter of the two pharmacists who were very, very, very wealthy and were known for having political connections because the mother was even running for office. On December 11th, her mother held a press conference with their attorneys, proclaiming that Yusun had no motive to hurt her boyfriend. The attorney said that they had found another suspect in their own private investigation and they would announce it soon. Well, the attorney pointed a finger at one of the backup dancers, one of the black backup dancers. This dancer, who was contracted just in this dance group West, had already returned to the United States following Sung-jae's death because she didn't have a job there anymore. Her visa would have run out. But just as I mentioned before with the drugs being labeled a foreign problem, the attorney tried to state that Sung-jae experimented with drugs because the black backup dancer had brought them from America. However, there was no evidence to support this, and it played into xenophobic, racist narratives that are often seen in this kind of sensationalist media. Her attorney also mentioned that since magnesium sulfate had been prescribed to Yusun's dog, but wasn't found in Sung-jae's system, which was a crucial component of the euthanization, it indicated that Yusun hadn't attempted to murder him. Rather, if she did provide the drugs to him, or if he had taken them from her, the Zolotil wouldn't have killed him alone, it would have just acted as an anesthetic. However, high levels of magnesium sulfate were later detected in Sung-jae's urine and skin tissue samples, suggesting that they were combined with Zolotil, which may have contributed to his death. I found it odd that the medical examiners, pathologists, toxicologists, and police never once talk about how the alcohol in his system may have played a part into making these drugs stronger. Although this case is close now, I really wish that is something we could have had an answer to. The police's top priority was to find the vials of Zolotil and magnesium sulfate, as well as the syringes. They were both missing, likely discarded by Yusun. They also were looking for Yusun's black fur bag and coat from that night because if she had put the vials or the syringes in her pockets or in the bag, there would be traces of those medicines on the fabric. Meanwhile, Yusun's defense team prepared for trial, determined to clear her name. They continued to argue that Sung-jae had taken the drug recreationally. In a letter to the news channel Hankyoreh, Yusun's attorney claimed that the drug had been diluted for a small dog, making it non-lethal even if administered in its entirety to someone of Sung-jae's size. However, the forensic pathologist testified that while the dosage found in Sung-jae's tissue was below the lethal threshold, this measurement was taken only from the skin tissue and might not reflect the total amount in his system when he was alive. The prosecution responded that Dr. Bae had taught Yusun how to euthanize her dog at home. His instructions, as he recalled, were, if your dog is moving a lot, inject Zolotil into the muscle and wait for the dog to relax from the anesthetic. Then, when the dog is calm, inject magnesium sulfate into his vein. He had taught her that Zolotil can anesthetize when injected intravenously, but if you have to, you can inject it into the muscle, it'll just take longer. But when you combine these two drugs, it'll euthanize your dog. The second trial took place on February 23rd, focusing squarely on Yusun's guilt. The courtroom was packed with teenage fans of Sung-jae's, who were very vocal in their disdain. As Yusun took the stand, the room erupted with boos and cursing and girls yelling at her. The judge attempted to maintain order, trying to get the security to control them, but every time Yusun would stand up to speak, the fans' anger just started all over again. These fans deeply invested in their parasocial relationship with Sung-jae, someone who had never known them. They were very quick to vilify someone perceived as an enemy to their idol. Keep in mind that the public did not know the details of this case. These fans were immediately assuming that this woman was guilty just because she was on trial, which many people do assume that someone on trial is guilty, but I like to maintain that someone is innocent until proven guilty. I think, as someone who doesn't have legal training, has never worked in the justice system, my opinion really doesn't matter. This phenomenon is not exclusive to K-pop, but it's particularly prevalent in K-pop because the crowd was so unruly. The judge had to decide to cut the session short and rescheduled the trial for a later date. The trial reconvened on March 8th, and once again, the gallery was just filled with teenagers, most of them teenage girls wearing their school uniforms, carrying their backpacks. The students were warned this time they needed to behave, and they were reminded that recording was strictly prohibited. Despite the warnings, as soon as Yusun entered the courtroom, whispers rippled through the audience. The prosecution faced a very, very challenging case. The evidence they had was circumstantial. Yusun had obtained Zolotil from a veterinarian. Sung-jae had died from a lethal dose of the same drug, but they lacked crucial physical evidence that would prove that that drug definitively came from Yusun. Without these, there was really no legal way to prove that the drug in Sung-jae's system was indeed the same one that Yusun had acquired. The case was so high profile that the prosecution brought in Professor Lee Jung-bin from Seoul National University's College of Medicine. This name may mean nothing to you, but I hear it often because he is known as the father of Korean forensic science. He took the stand as a key witness for the prosecution. Professor E analyzed the autopsy evidence and concluded that the 28 injection marks were made in quick succession while he was alive. Based on this analysis, the time of death was revised to be slightly before 3 a.m. on November 20th. They brought in a second forensic expert, Professor Hwang Jok-jun, who corroborated this, stating that 2:50 a.m. was the latest Sung-jae could have been alive. The new timeline contradicted Yusun's previous statement that she had left at 3:40 a.m., supposedly before Sung-jae died. The defense, however, argued that the blood concentration of Zolotil in Sung-jae's body was not high enough to be lethal for someone his size. As the trial concluded, the defense was scrambling to find their own expert witnesses to counter the prosecution's claims. The fourth and fifth trials were set to be held on March 26th. The argument stopped being whether or not Sung-jae had killed himself with these drugs, and then it turned into, even if he did take these drugs, it wasn't what killed him. During these sessions, the prosecution pressed Yusun on the exact time she left the hotel. She remained adamant that she was innocent and that Sung-jae was alive when she departed, but she admitted that she couldn't exactly say when she left. The prosecution attempted to trip her up by questioning why she didn't simply stay at the hotel overnight. Yusun responded that she had difficulty sleeping, and initially after falling asleep with Sung-jae, she had woken up and decided to return home to sleep in her own bed. This is when the prosecution's line of questioning grew increasingly ruthless, probing Yusun's characters and her motives. They asked if her willingness to end her own life after a failed exam meant that she didn't value human life. The questioning was designed to break her down, to see if she would reveal any hidden truths. But Yusun held her ground, continuing to deny any involvement in Sung-jae's death. Then, Dr. Bae was called to testify. He had previously stated that he had given Yusun the drug in November, but when asked about the specific date, he couldn't be sure. He started to say, give or take a few weeks on that date. As Dr. Bae spoke, unsure of the details of the initial visit, the prosecution's case got a little bit weaker. Immediately following this trial, Dr. Bae started making arrangements to immigrate to Canada. People started speculating that the doctor did this to avoid being a part of the trial and having their name dragged through the mud, or because they possibly knew more than they were telling. This trial drug on. The 6th and 7th trial were held on April 15. This is for the witness examinations of Sung-jae's senior manager Jung and manager Lee. Manager Lee was able to testify about the incident in which Yoo-sun had shot Sung-jae with the gas pistol. He said that when he came to Sung-jae's home after he was late for a meeting, Sung-jae walked out of the house angry. Lee saw Yoo-sun walking behind him looking like she was ready to murder him. She screamed, "You should die," and then shot Sung-jae in the back with a gas pistol. Sung-jae's face was red and his clothes were torn. I didn't know what a gas pistol was, so I did some research. Gas pistols shoot these small gas-filled projectiles that spray toxic gas as a self-defense method. It's like pistol version of pepper spray. The defense argued that the gun was fired due to a mistake, and that the extent of the accidental damage was just a little bit of stinging in both of their eyes. But Lee said that there was gas remnants all over Sung-jae's body and that she had aimed to hit him. Yoo-sun tried to argue that the gas gun was only loaded with a test bullet at the time, but Lee stated he smelled the gas and it was enough to sting his eyes. The prosecution is trying to establish that Yoo-sun was violent and abusive towards Sung-jae prior to allegedly murdering him. But it was just his story against hers because the police were never called. The 8th and 9th trials were held on Monday, April 29th, 1996. Backup dancer Noah testified that during their performance and afterwards until he went to sleep, Sung-jae was wearing a tank top, arms exposed, no injection marks on his arm. Yoo-sun had actually been the one that brought with her the green long sleeve shirt for Sung-jae to wear at the hotel. He said that it had been known by everyone that Sung-jae hated sleeping in shirts. He typically slept without one entirely. So it was suspicious that Yoo-sun brought him a shirt to wear to sleep in, despite the fact that he had tons of clothes at the hotel for him to wear. He'd been living there. Then, he was found wearing the long sleeve shirt, which covered up the injection marks when the paramedics found him. If he was still alive when the paramedics arrived, them not knowing he had been injected with something delayed him receiving life-saving treatment. It wasn't only Noah who implied that Yoo-sun was controlling of Sung-jae. When Yoo-sun was around, she often didn't let Sung-jae see his friends or tried to influence him not to go out. Others would also go on to testify that she constantly prevented fans from speaking to him, and even yelled at fans who tried to approach them in public. Noah's testimony would also give insight to the relationship between Yoo-sun and Sung-jae. On the outside, they were a good couple, but Noah spent a lot of time with Sung-jae. And when Sung-jae went to LA, his dancers went with him to film the music video. Yoo-sun called him obsessively. She always had to know where he was and what he was doing. She even called all of the dancers to get them to talk to him. Eventually, he answered the phone and screamed, "You bitch, leave me alone, you're so annoying." It was clear that they fought often, and they had even broken up prior to him going to the US. Yoo-sun was often accusing Sung-jae of cheating on her in America as well, even though they were no longer together. When Yoo-sun offered to come to the US, Sung-jae refused to let her and told her not to come, which made them fight even more. She decided to start harassing Noah and the others on the phone, constantly asking if Sung-jae was cheating on her or where he was and what he was doing. When he returned to Korea, Sung-jae told everyone he was going to reluctantly go see Yoo-sung because she had begged him to see her one last time before she went to Japan to study abroad. She said, "Just see me one more time and then we'll be done." In one instance in particular, Yoo-sun overheard Sung-jae agreeing to meet manager Lee for lunch, and she just showed up in the middle of their lunch because she thought he was cheating on her with another woman. The defense had to quickly try to repair Yoo-sun's image by bringing in a close friend of hers who testified that Yoo-sun had many friends and was very popular. They also said that Yoo-sun never said she was going to study abroad in Japan, and she didn't even have tickets to go to Japan. That was just a lie that she had told Sung-jae, apparently. The defense also brought in their own vet that testified that the amount of Zolotil and magnesium sulfate in Sung-jae's body would not have been enough to kill him. For some reason, the defense requested an experiment to prove this. The vet had prepared a recording of this experiment where he took 3 real medium-sized dogs and injected them with the same amount that was found in Sung-jae's body. The dogs were unconscious, but they survived. They were trying to prove that the amount of medication given to Yoo-sun was only enough to kill her small Maltese, and not enough to even kill a medium-sized dog. The original forensic pathologist who helped perform the autopsy spoke as a witness for the prosecution. The cause of death was determined to be death from drug intoxication. The lethal dose couldn't be determined from the dog experiment or other studies because there was no objective data. This drug is not used for people. He also concluded that the time of death was near 3 a.m. and not what they previously thought, because they now had more data from the lividity and drugs in their system. The defense was also able to get the pathologist to admit that the lethal dose of magnesium in his body didn't have a huge effect on him. The entire trial was now riding on this drug being lethal or not. Because there was such a lack of physical evidence, they had to determine if the drugs were from Yusun, and then if it was truly the drugs that killed him. On May 20th, 1996, a determination hearing was held. There was one final witness the prosecution brought, a middle school girl who was outside of the hotel at 4:40 a.m. We can call her Miss Park. She was a middle school girl who remembered the exact time she was standing outside the hotel because she was rushing home before her parents woke up. As she passed the hotel, a woman she identified as Yusun came out of the building and they almost bumped into one another. Miss Park, who didn't know how Yusun found her, was contacted by Yusun and asked not to testify about what she had seen. The court actually did not accept this testimony, however, stating that the testimony was not credible. Some believed that this middle school girl was probably just a super fan of Sung-jae's. With all of the witness examinations over, the presiding judge asked for the closing statements. The judge listened and then spoke. Considering the statements and the victim showing no signs of resistance, with a concealment of the drugs and syringe after the crime, this is a premeditated crime and is different from accidental murder. In addition, the defendant has no remorse or room for sympathy and is quick to lie. As well, the defendant has attachment issues, hatred, and greed, and therefore murdered her lover and attempted to cover up the crime. She deserves the death penalty, which is the max penalty under the law. That was the conclusion. The fans in the gallery literally shot up and started clapping and shouting. Yusun screamed at them, "I didn't kill him," and everyone started to boo. When Yusun spoke to reporters, she said she was confident that an appeal would have this overturned. Her family changed attorneys and a new judge was appointed to the case. The new lawyer, Seo Jung-woo, had defended the Sampung department store collapse CEO, high-profile corruption cases, and the Sungsu Bridge collapse. He had a lot of experience defending people who were very clearly guilty. In the appeal, they argued that there was insufficient evidence and that the circumstantial evidence alone couldn't determine her guilt. As well, that the time of death was presumed by the forensic scientists and wasn't enough to determine whether or not Yusun was present when the injections occurred. They also revisited the time of death through various experts arguing back and forth. After multiple trials, on November 5th, 1996, the sentencing hearing came for Yusun. The judge considered similar other cases and reversed the death penalty for Yusun and actually acquitted her of all charges almost a full year after the death of Sung-jae. The acquittal left a bitter taste, with no new evidence emerging to bring justice for Sung-jae. Yusun, now a free woman, became the target of relentless fan obsession. Her every move was tracked. Her drastic transformation through plastic surgery and her success becoming a dentist was all done under the eye of Sung-jae's lifelong fans. At every move, she was doxxed online. Yusun decided to change her name to Yewon and worked at a dental clinic, although it is now believed she is retired. In 2019, Yusun came back into the conversation when the famous investigative television series Unanswered Questions announced that they were going to release an episode on Sung-jae's death. She filed a legal petition for the episode to be banned from airing because it would imply that she was involved in the murder of Sung-jae, which private investigators did conclude that she was the likely culprit. The courts agreed that because she had been acquitted of the crime, that this would be considered defamation. Unanswered Questions had no choice but to scrap the episode they had worked hard on and they couldn't release it to the public. I cannot help but believe that there was something they discovered in their case, often which includes reenactments of the crime scenes, that would have shed light on proving her guilt. It was because of this that the public discovered the dentist office Yoo-sun worked at, and they revealed all of her personal information. Since then, the death has been a dark shadow on pop culture history in Korea. In 2023, at the 30th anniversary of Deus, a woman was found removing memorial items at a site for the late singer Sung-jae. When the woman was confronted, she said that she felt like his spirit was trapped by someone who was cursing his memorials. Regardless of her reasoning, it is clear to see the impact that Sung-jae had on people's lives. Some say that he was like the BTS of his time, although he was never given the opportunity to rise to that much fame. Sung-wook, Sung-jae's little brother, went on to follow in his footsteps and debuted as a singer in 1997. But he didn't reach the same success as his brother. In 2005, he retired from performing after suffering injuries in a fire and was visited by Yoo-sun in the hospital. He was so shocked he pretended like he didn't remember her. According to fans online, he now works at or owns a cafe. In the end, despite the suspicions and the evidence that seemed to stack up against her, Yoo-sun walked free. Without the hard physical evidence they needed, the police couldn't make the charges stick. And just like that, the case fell apart. Though all signs pointed to Yoo-sun, no one was ever held accountable for Sung-jae's death. His life was cut short, and the justice he deserved never came. To this day, Sung-jae's murder remains one of South Korea's most talked about unsolved cases. A case that left me wondering, will justice ever be found, or is the truth lost forever? As always, thank you for listening. Join us on Discord for free movie nights, find sources for free on Patreon, and join our quarterly sticker club on Patreon. Follow the show wherever you listen from, and thank you to my patrons: Vix Mac, Lala, William White, G1 Edwards, Nico, Elijah Hancock, Anomanom, Dr. Bob, Lumos, Emma Brown, David Tafoya, Adriana, Pip, Dade512, Lisa, Veronica, Olive, Caitlin, Missy G, and Sharon Evans. Daumay to payo. See you next time.